Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Only 48 days left now till the World Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana in November in London. That's less than 7 weeks. On Chess to Impress we continue the countdown, the build-up towards a great match. Carlsen Caruana is the 47th event in the history of the official and undisputed World Championship. And building up to that event, we're looking at the first 46 events. We have arrived in 1960, we're in the middle of the Botvinnik era. And in 1960, as you can see, Botvinnik defended his title, which he had regained from Vasily Smyslov in 1958 against the young Mikhail Tal. Tal had won the interzonal tournament in Slovenia with 13.5 out of 20 games. And then he won the candidates tournament in Yugoslavia with 20 out of 28 games. 1.5 points ahead of Paul Keres. This is a picture from the participants of the candidates tournament. You see on the far left Tigran Petrosyan, the 9th world champion. 3rd from the left is Mikhail Tal. Then we see 5th from the left, former world champion Vasily Smyslov. And we see 3rd from the right. Who is that young boy there? It is 16-year-old Bobby Fischer, who also played in the 1959 candidates tournament. Here we see the results of that event. It was an 8-player event and everybody played 4 games against each other. Mikhail Tal won the event, and the 3 other world champions we see Petrosyan in 3rd place, Smyslov in 4th and Bobby Fischer in joint 5th place. The match Botvinnik against Tal was held in Moscow. It was the best of 24 games, and in case of a 12-12 outcome, Botvinnik would retain the title. Here's a picture from the match, Tal on the left and world champion Botvinnik on the right. In this video we will look at game 6 of this match. Let's get into it. It was the 26th of March 1960. White was Botvinnik, black was Tal. Tal had won the first game of the match and then 4 draws followed. And Tal wrote about game 6, even though I was a full point ahead, I was not satisfied with the beginning of the match. In the last 4 games my opponent had been able to direct the game into his favorite channels and invariably seized the initiative. And Botvinnik opened c4 in game 6, knight f6, knight f3. And Tal writes, this is to some degree an unmasking. White stresses the fact that he has no intention of playing a Nimzo-Indian or a Samish King's Indian. In the Samish, the pawn goes to f3 and that's no longer possible. g6, g3, bishop g7 and bishop g2. Botvinnik plays a very solid setup against black's King's Indian defense. With g3 and bishop g2, the danger of being checkmated in a raging kingside attack is not there, as it is in the main line where that bishop goes to e2. The defensive shield around white's king is solid in this fianchetto variation. Tal castles d4, d6, knight c3 and knight b d7. Prepared for this game by Tal, who writes, in many games I've preferred the systems with either c5 or knight c6, so we assumed that Botvinnik would be less prepared for knight b d7, which was played in the game. Botvinnik castled e5, e4 and c6, the most flexible move, as Tal writes. h3 from Botvinnik, and Tal explains that white wants to play the bishop to e3, and he wants to avoid that bishop then being attacked by knight f6 to g4. Tal writes that white's intentions are now to harmoniously place his pieces in the center, and if he sooner or later can force his opponent to exchange on d4, he will get the possibility to create pressure against black's weak d-pawn. Tal played queen b6 here, and we have all learned, when we learn chess, don't put your queen in the game too early. Well, that is a rule of thumb, but only the best players in the world can break this rule. And Grandmaster Sarawan says this is typical of Tal, this move. He is forcing the play. Here bishop e3 is not possible, because then queen takes b2. There's another rule of thumb saying never take on b2, but this is a good version for black, attacking the unprotected knight on c3. You could say you can prepare bishop e3 by playing rook b1, but then black has a tactic. E takes d4, knight takes, and now the very surprising knight takes e4. because now this bishop is also attacking the knight as well as the queen. So knight takes e4 and then bishop takes d4, and as Sarah once said, black is happy with the outcome of the opening. He has an extra pawn. Later it was found that after queen b6, the move c5 is the best move. That gives white an advantage and that put an end to this line. But in the game after queen b6, Botvinnik played d5. Very solid move. Tal took, c takes, and as Sarah once says, now we see how Tal very impressively maneuvers around the pawn structure. These pawns are now fixed, and we see how Tal moves around them. He played knight c5, attacking the e4 pawn now with 2 pieces. It's only protected by this knight. So knight e1, now the bishop is also protecting that pawn. Bishop d7 developing, and knight d3, trading off black's strong knight on c5. The move knight d3 took Botvinnik 10 minutes. And according to Tal, this is a sign that Botvinnik should play in more tournaments. He said participation in competition is necessary for a chess player to keep his sporting form. Botvinnik was known to not play in many events while being world champion. He really focused on the world championship matches. The knights were swapped and rook fc8 on the open file. Rook b1, preparing bishop e3 without losing the b2 pawn. Knight h5, and Sarah once said, what is that? What does that move have to do with anything? Well, we'll soon see. Bishop e3 is planned, attacking the queen, and the queen goes to b4, not backing away, going forward. If you attack the queen once more with a3, then the queen goes to b3 and is relatively safe there. Botvinnik played queen e2 to protect the b2 pawn once more, and also discouraging f5. If you play f5 now, then there is e takes f5, and you cannot take with the pawn because then your knight is hanging. So you have to take with the bishop. Bishop takes f5, and then rook bc1, and this is somewhat better for white. After queen e2, Tal decided to play rook c4. Another active move, and Sarah once said this is really Tal in his element, always wanting to make his pieces as active as possible. Rook fc1 from Botvinnik. The other rook comes to the open file, and king h2, tucking his king away safely. No checks on the first rank, which takes some tactical possibilities out of the position. And white is saying, my position is very good, very solid. What are you going to do? Well, Tal is going to show us what he's going to do. He played f5, typical King's Indian move. E takes, bishop takes. That move is attacking the rook on b1, and rook a1 was played, threatening g4 with a fork. According to Grandmaster Sarah, Botvinnik thought he was positionally winning here. He's going to kick the bishop with g4, and then he will get the nice e4 square for his knight. But now hold on to your hats, here comes a wonderful and typical move from Mikhail Tal. Here he played knight h5 to f4, sacrificing a piece. Tal's own words from the book he wrote about the match. He writes, in my opinion, the arguments that this move raised were completely pointless. Suffice it to say that all the other continuations are bad, and if the knight sacrifice is incorrect, then a question mark should not be placed after black's 21st move, which was this move, but say after his 17th move. Be that as it may, after the knight sacrifice, black's pieces, and especially the recently unemployed bishop on g7, become very active all over the board, and white has to seriously take into account all the numerous sharp variations, and the sacrifice must be accepted. Writes Tal, this move must have come as a great shock to Botvinnik and to the public, the audience in the Pushkin Theatre where this match was held. You have to take, otherwise black will take on g2 and white's king will get compromised. So g takes f4 is the move, and e takes f4, and now, as Tal writes, this bishop has come to life. And also white's king, which was safely tucked away on h2, is now a bit drafty, not as safe as white would want it to be. Tal has created chaos on the board. After the game was found that white's best way to play is a3, kicking the queen, queen b3, and then take on a7. If you then play b6 to trap that bishop, there is a4 with the threat of a5, and white is better here with his extra piece. Botvinnik did not play a3 and then take on a7. He played the safe move bishop d2, but that gives up the pawn on b2, and Tal now has a second pawn for the piece. And now the b2 pawn is gone, this bishop is even stronger on the diagonal. Rook a b1 hitting the queen. Can you not take that rook? Well, that's what Botvinnik had seen. If black takes on b1, then rook takes. If you go to a3, that's not good because of knight b5. And if after rook takes b1 you go to c2, the only other option, then there is bishop e4, hitting the queen again. Rook e8 is the only move, pinning the bishop on e4. Then queen takes c4, queen takes d2, and knight e2. This was a variation that Botvinnik had seen, and white is winning here with his extra piece. But after rook a b1, Tal did not take on b1. He played f3, another magical move, counter-attacking white's queen. Bishop takes f3 is the best move here. And there are lots of complicated variations which are not easy to calculate over the board, not even if you're the world champion. And also Botvinnik was in time trouble here. Let me give you one example line why this is good for white. Bishop takes b1, taking the material, rook takes, and then queen c2. Bishop e4, that bishop gets then taken in this variation. Knight takes, bishop e5 check, it looks all good for black. King g2, and queen takes b1. Black is now material up, he's in exchange up, but white is winning with the very nice move knight takes d6. If you take that knight, then there is queen e6 check, winning the rook on c8 because of the fork. So king g7, let's continue the variation. Queen d7 check first, important move. King back to the bottom rank, and queen takes c8 check. Bishop interposes and queen e6 check, and white is winning because of his strong d-pawn. So all that after f3 and then bishop takes f3. But Botvinnik played another move. He took the queen, rook takes b2, and that's a bad move. Tal took white's queen, and this pawn now on the second rank. Only 3 moves ago that pawn was on e5 and now it's on e2. Rook b3, protecting the knight that is attacked 3 times. Rook d4, attacking the bishop. As Tal writes, black's clumsy rook suddenly finds colossal strength in the center of the board. And in its alliance with the passed pawn on e2, this brings black victory. Bishop e1 was played, saving that bishop. Bishop e5 check. Black's bishops are beautifully harmonized. King g1 and bishop f4, and Tal writes, black misses the chance to end this game beautifully by rook takes c3. He gives this variation, rook b takes c3, and then rook d1, threatening to take on c3, after which white can resign, but white can still play rook c7. Bishop f4, hitting the rook on c1, white can still play rook e7. Rook takes c1 and then take that very strong pawn on e2. And if we do a body count, then we see that black has an extra pawn on b7, and his pieces are better placed than white's. Black is winning here. So after king g1, rook takes c3 was the move that Tal missed. He played bishop f4, also not a bad move, hitting the rook on c1. Knight takes e2, taking that very strong pawn. Rook takes, and if you now take on c1, there is rook d1 winning. Botvinnik took on d4, took the other rook. Rook takes c1 check, winning the piece back that he sacrificed 9 moves ago. Bishop interposed. Botvinnik has struggled himself into a lost endgame. This was the best he could get. And bishop e4 was Tal's move. And Tal writes, the 2 active bishops and an extra pawn are more than enough to win. You cannot take on b7 now because of bishop d3, winning that piece. So knight e2 was played by Botvinnik, bishop e5 and f4 to get the bishop out of the pin with king f2. Bishop dropped back to f6, and if you now go to f2 there is bishop h4 check, protecting the rook. White played rook takes b7 instead. Bishop takes d5, and you cannot take the a7 pawn because of rook takes e2, bishop takes e2, and then we have a bishop fork, winning the rook and the game. So after bishop takes d5, white cannot touch the a pawn and played rook c7. Bishop takes, and now you can take that pawn on a7. That is now possible because the fork is no longer there. Rook takes e2 would be a big blunder because white has an in-between move, a check. King g7, bishop takes e2, and that's not what black wants. So white can take on a7. Bishop c4 was played. A check. King f7, another check. King went to e6. Rook back to a3. d5. King f2 hitting the rook. Bishop h4 check protects the rook. King g2. King d6. Knight g3. That knight was taken. Bishop takes c4. D takes and king takes bishop. And after all the crazy action in this game, we have now a winning rook and pawn endgame for black. Tal played king d5. Rook a7. And there goes the passed pawn. Rook c7 behind the passed pawn and king d4. And here the game was adjourned. The move that was sealed by Botvinnik was rook c7 to d7, but it never came on the board because after the adjournment and after Botvinnik had analyzed the position, he resigned. Tal writes, in this position the game was adjourned and white sealed his move. Arriving home, my trainer and I set up the position and were quickly convinced that black's passed pawn was irresistible. Therefore, on the next day we did not even eat breakfast and we waited for the sound of the referee's bell. The telephone, I'm sure, with information about White's resignation. At noon, the long-awaited bell sounded. White had resigned. What an incredible game, and let's hear it in the words of somebody who was there, Lev Karyton. He said, this match played in Moscow in the spring of 1960 is forever engraved in my memory. Hundreds of chess fans who had failed to buy an entrance ticket stayed outside the Pushkin Theatre, watching on a big demonstration board the games of the match. I will never forget the famous 6th game, in which Tal, right after the opening moves, sacrificed a knight. It was a challenge to Botvinnik, to all his followers who were trying to put the game into logic and algorithms. As if nothing had happened, Tal was pacing to and fro on the stage, and his famous opponent, who had scored victories over such legends as Lasker, Capablanca and Aljochin, confronted with a surprise sacrifice, was taking all possible pains to refute Tal's daring decision. All in vain. Botvinnik had a few minutes left on his clock when Stalberg and Golombek, the arbiters of the match, transferred the game backstage. The spectators were so excited that the atmosphere in the playing hall was more reminiscent of a football match. Tal won this game, and in spite of Botvinnik's stubborn resistance, he won the whole match. And he did indeed. Here you see the table. After 21 games the match was over. Tal won by 12.5, 8.5 by a 4-point margin and was the 8th official and undisputed world champion. But as per the regulations, Botvinnik would get a rematch. So 1 year later, Tal and Botvinnik played against each other again. And I will tell you about that match in the next video. Hope you enjoyed this video about one of the most famous games ever played in the history of the World Championship. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you like the video, if you like the series, please share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. The link to the series is here. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.